Good morning. Trust everyone's doing well. The difficulties, brothers and sisters, in our lives, the obstacles that we face, give God the opportunity to show His power and His grace. It's always an honor and a privilege to be able to visit with you for a few moments. A special welcome to each of you who might be visiting with us today. Now, before I get into the crux of the sermon, I've got a quick announcement with regard to a conference that's going to be taking place in July. A conference that's entitled Campus for Christ. It's hosted by the Bible Chair, by this congregation, and by West Texas A&M. It's going to take place in July on the 20th, 21st, 22nd, and 23rd of that month. Campus for Christ is an annual event for campus ministers and ministries throughout the United States. Give you a little perspective, there are about 4,700 colleges in our nation. There are about 20 million students who are enrolled in those colleges and universities. Yet there are only some 125 active campus ministries. In addition to their intellectual and professional well-being, our university, our college students need faith-based fellowship. Now, this initiative was started back in 1957 at Texas Tech, and we are hosting this event for the very first time this summer. And hosting this conference is going to take a lot of work, and a lot of work has already been done, but we need a lot more work. Volunteers are needed and are welcome. Kent is going to be here this evening to give you a few more details about this conference. Any questions that you might have, you can ask those of Kent, you can ask those of myself. We'll have some volunteer forms available this evening as well. And I urge each and every one of you to consider this Campus for Christ event in your prayer life. As I mentioned a moment ago, 20 million students are in our nation's colleges and universities, and we need to help fulfill the Great Commission on those campuses. You know, words have always fascinated me. I don't know why, but they have. We've got 26 letters in our alphabet, and those letters can be combined in all kinds of different ways, sometimes short, sometimes medium length, sometimes long. We can take the sequence of those letters and put them in a whole myriad of ways, and in fact, we've got about 1.1 million words in the English language. And as I've been told, that list grows by a couple of thousand every year. Back in 1900, English had about 525,000 words. Now we've pretty much doubled that over the last century plus. And in spite of the fact that our language has 1.1 million words, the average adult vocabulary consists of about 20,000 words. So, typical adult in this country knows about 2% of the words and the phrases and the terms that are endemic to English. Now, when I teach a class at school, it's not uncommon for me to begin a class session with these seldom used words, these unusual words, these new words. And I do this to give students a sense of context, what it is we're going to be talking about today. Because if we're going to talk about a particular issue on a particular day, these words and these phrases, even though they're unusual and even though they might be difficult and we don't use them in everyday language, they're essential to understand. It's essential for an appreciation and understanding of the course topic. So it's very common for me to have students, as soon as we get into class, I welcome them, give them a sense of what's going on each day, and I'll tell them, pull out your phones and go to the internet. And here are our words of the day, and you have your word of the day. And what I want you to do is take that word of the day, do a little bit of internet search, write that word of the day down, write that definition down, and then spend a few moments meeting somebody else in class that you don't know yet, and teach your word of the day to other students. And so in one of my classes, those words of the day might consist of something like dyslipidemia, hyperplasia, adventitia, or chylomicron. And the students sometimes are confused, and they should be confused. Sometimes it's painful to go through a learning process. And sometimes it's a challenge to learn and to grow. And I think learning should sometimes make us uncomfortable. And the students soon realize that, I need to know those words today. One, because they're going to come up on those exams that I give them every other week. But more saliently, they're important to what they're going to be doing professionally. Every single word, brothers and sisters, can tell us a great deal. Even a single word can mean something very important. And I think even a single word can bring to light a characteristic that I believe reflects and affects our relationship with God. And so therefore, it's my hope and my prayer, and has been for quite some time now, that this morning's sermon, a sermon which is entitled, Today's Word of the Day is Hupomone, touches your heart. Luke chapter 8, verse 15. And the seed in the good soil. The seed in the good soil. These are the ones who have heard the word with an honest and good heart. They hold fast. And these seed in the good soil, they bear fruit with hupomone. Now, hupomone is not patience which simply accepts things. Hupomone is not an attitude of grin and bear it. Hupomone is not an attitude of, well, you got to do what you got to do. Hupomone is the patience. It's the endurance which masters things. Hupomone is the grit and determination that overcomes circumstances. Hupomone is determination. Hupomone is unhurrying, yet also undelaying, which presses on and refuses to be deflected. Obstacles, brothers and sisters, do not daunt hupomone. Discouragements do not take hupomone's hope away. Hupomone is a steadfast endurance. It's a focus beyond the pain, and it carries on until the end. This weekend, Brenda and I are celebrating our 28th wedding anniversary. And almost 28 years ago, we purchased our first home. It was a little ranch house just south of Joplin, Missouri. This house sat at the bottom of a hill. There were probably 4 or 5 houses that went up the hill to our south. And the house itself sat on a pretty big lot. It was about ½ acre in size, but the lot sloped to the north and the lot sloped to the east, and we had a driveway that was on the north side of the house and went around to the back or the east side of the house, and that driveway was made out of gravel. And so whenever it would rain in southwest Missouri, it comes and comes and comes and comes, does the rain, very different than here. And almost every time that rain would come, a significant part of that driveway would wash out, this gravel driveway. And it got real old real fast to have to fill in that gravel driveway that would keep getting washed out every time it would rain. And so Renda and I called in a concrete contractor and asked for some estimates. How much would it cost to build a retaining wall along our driveway? Now, the bids came back, and for newlyweds, those bids were just a little too expensive. So I just put it off. Well, one day I was having a driveway conversation, I guess, if you will, with Sid. Sid was our neighbor to the north. Sid was a jack-of-all-trades kind of person. His day job was that of building roads. And so one day I was lamenting to Sid. I was lamenting about the rain washing out the driveway. And I was lamenting about the extra work every time it would rain. I welcomed the rain, but having to fill in that driveway was getting a little bit old. And I was lamenting about the fact that we had contractors come in and give us bids for a concrete retaining wall, and they were just way too expensive for us at the time. And Sid said, "You know, Dirk, I can show you how to fix that. I can tell you how to do that retaining wall that you need with railroad ties. Well, I was young and dumb, naive at the time. And I went to Sid and I said, Sid, even though I'm a Kansas Jayhawker, we live in Missouri now, so show me. So Sid was all excited. Now, some of you, these are new words of the day that you've never heard of. Sid was all excited because he just got a brand new computer with a 5.25-inch floppy disk drive. Some of you have no idea what that is. It was fire and then wheel and then the 5.25-inch floppy disk. Nevertheless, he was excited about that, and on that 5.25-inch floppy disk, he had a new program. Computer-assisted design. So Sid was all excited about showing me what this was all about. So I went to Sid's house, and he started drawing out the plans, and he carefully explained. He said, Dirk, all you need to do is start at the lowest point of the driveway. Okay, got it. Put those railroad ties about 3/4 of the way into the ground. They've got to be almost completely buried as that first row. And then stagger that first row, bury them into the ground each time as you go for the length of the retaining wall that you need. And then after you get about a row, maybe 2 rows, then what you need to do is insert dead man. I said, what on earth is that? Well, that's a railroad tie that goes perpendicular to the main structure. And then when you backfill with material, the backfill material is weighty enough, it's heavy enough, has enough mass, it engorges around that dead man, and the dead man then supports the wall from the inside. So there's no need for external bracing. You got a nice smooth wall on the outside. I'm listening to this, and I knew just enough math, and I knew just enough physics, and I thought, okay, I think I follow what's going on. He said, and then also, now, Dirk, nails and screws, they ain't going to work. He said, what you need to do is get yourself several hundred feet of 3/8-inch concrete rebar. Cut those into about foot and a half long lengths, and then hammer those in with a sledgehammer. Those will be your nails. Like I said, I was young and naive at the time. I thought, hey, okay, I think I got this, Sid. I think I can do it. Now, as a little reference, a railroad tie is about 8.5 inches by 8.5 inches by 8.5 inches by 8.5 inches. They're 8 feet long. They weigh between 200 and 300 pounds. Okay? A few other numbers for perspective. This wall that I needed to build was 60 feet long and 6 feet tall. That was the main structure. Then I had 2 other structures that were perpendicular to the main structure. They were each about 20 feet long and 4 feet tall. I estimated that I used about 30,000 pounds worth of railroad ties. That was for the structure. I used about another 6,000 pounds of railroad ties for the dead man. I estimated that I moved 800,000 pounds of base rock and crushed asphalt for backfill, and I used about 300,000 pounds of topsoil. Now, I mentioned a moment ago, we lived in Joplin, Missouri at the time. We lived on the south side of Joplin, Missouri. The south side of Joplin, Missouri is on the northwest edge of the Ozark Mountains. We had about 4 inches soil, and below that was rock. I'm not saying rocks. It was one big rock. I got very familiar that summer with things like shovels and post hole diggers and picks and crowbars and wrecking bars. Those were the tools of the trade for me that summer. Now, I began that project on Friday of the Memorial Day, 26 years, 48 hours ago. I was a lot more fit then, a whole lot younger. I was a lot stronger. Mentioned a moment ago I'm a Kansas Jayhawker, but at the time I could work like a Missouri mule. I could stay outside all day. It didn't matter how hot, didn't matter how humid. I could tolerate just about everything. And I told Renda, I think I can punch this out by Monday. Wow, was I wrong. It took me that entire first weekend simply to dig the trenches for the very first layer of that 60 by 6 by 20 by 4 by 20 by 4 railroad tie retaining wall. I firsthand learned the meaning of hupomone. Later goes in the second layer of railroad ties, and then the third. Sid saw that I was making decent progress. He said, "Looks like you're ready for some backfill, Dirk." I said, "Yeah, sure, sounds good." So he magnanimously brings a load of backfill. Now, this wasn't a GMC Sierra full of backfill. This was one of those tandem wheel dump truck full base rock and crushed asphalt. He pulled up to the house, backed into the front yard, dumped out the load. The load was in our front yard. It was bigger than the house. And I'm just, Sid, dude, man. So I started to backfill in with a single shovel and a single wheelbarrow. Then another layer or two of railroad ties. I hope to take a break for a couple of days, but while I go to school for summer session, Sid, over his lunch break, he decides to bring another load of backfill. I come home from school, turn the corner, there it is, bigger than the house. I thought I was going to go play golf tonight. No, I'm going to move this base rock and asphalt with a single shovel and a single wheelbarrow. And that work was backbreaking. It was hot. It was smelly. If you've ever been around railroad ties, those things aren't a bed of roses. It was humid, got a lot of blisters, smashed an occasional finger, smashed an occasional toe, and this routine goes on for day after day after day for several weeks. But I press on, and the wall begins to take shape. And it's almost counterintuitive, but as the wall got longer and as the wall got taller, it actually got stronger because of the dead man and the backfill. And I broke some shovels, I broke some post hole diggers, I broke a couple of picks, and with all due respect, I didn't throw those things in the trash. I buried them with the backfill. They were for the rest of their existence, they're going to be part of that project. Neighbors start to drop by and ask about what's going on. "Dirk, that looks like a big project." Really? Never? Yeah, thanks. You're very astute powers of observation. Yeah, that's good. But they ask me how I'm doing this and what's the technique and why are you doing it this way? And they would pat me on the back and say, "You're doing a good job. It's going to eventually yield some important results." I don't try to rush the job just to get it done. I work very hard, and very persistently, very diligently, and this is important, people, knowing that the end result will yield important benefits. This wall's not going to get me down. I'm going to overcome this, and that is hupomone. And then finally we get to that glorious day at the end of the project. The railroad ties are all in place. The backfill is there. The last of the topsoil is graded. I plant the fescue. The grass is growing. The project is complete. The yard is no longer sloped in this direction and sloped that direction. It has one tier, and then another tier, and then another tier. The first major rain comes, and it rained, and it rained, and it rained, and it rained, and the rain comes off the other houses and the lots and flow down to our lot, and the rain comes off our house, and it flows around the driveway and flows around this project. The driveway is intact. The water was diverted just like Sid designed it. I accepted that challenge of building that wall. I very carefully listened to everything that Sid told me to do. I followed those directions very carefully. And it worked. That challenge was changed into glory. Glory that the driveway was saved from washing out. Well, last week, as I was finishing some notes and working on some notes for this particular lesson, I downloaded an app on my phone, and that app is Google Earth. So I downloaded Google Earth. The app's on my phone. I spin the globe to the United States. I scroll just a little bit to Missouri. I focus in on the southwest corner of Missouri. I find Joplin. I scroll down a couple miles from Joplin. There's the Silver Creek Edition. I scroll to 125 Burgess in Joplin, Missouri. I open that thing and focus it down as close as I can get. That wall is still there. 26 years, 48 hours, and 15 minutes. It's still there. Doing its job. That's hupomone. Hupomone is used some 32 times in the New Testament, and it's translated as endurance. It's translated as patient enduring. It's translated as perseverance. It's translated as steadfastness. James chapter 1, starting in verse 2, brothers and sisters, it says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters. Consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces hupomone. Let hupomone finish its work, so you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives it generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all that they do." Brothers and sisters, suffering because of being a Christian should not surprise us. Jesus warned his disciples that they would face trials. And they did. They dealt with suffering. And they dealt with opposition. They dealt with pain. And they dealt with pressure. That warning was echoed by Peter and Paul. Persecution was experienced by the apostles. Life as an apostle was hard. Does that sound familiar? There's no question that it was risky to be known as a follower of Jesus then. And even today, there can be a terrible cost of being a Christian. Even today, in our world, it's increasingly hazardous to be identified as a Christian. But trials and pain and suffering, simply because we're Christian, those are not wasted. And this is especially true if you and I can understand that God uses those painful experiences to reflect His glory. Now, moreover, I think as we pass through the various trials that we encounter, we are being prepared for eternity. You see, as we go through those trials and tribulations, the prospect of heaven becomes more precious. It becomes closer, becomes more dear. And the allure, the attraction of this world, not so much. Not so much. Now, no one enjoys pain, no one enjoys suffering, no one enjoys trials and tribulations that we encounter when we're tested, but it can be a source of comfort if we understand and if we cling to the triumphal reward that awaits us. Think about the promises that Isaiah penned in Isaiah chapter 43. Now, these words were specifically written to Israel. There's no question, however, that they're salient today to you and me. "Now thus says the Lord, He who created you, O Jacob, He who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you will not be harmed. The flames shall not consume you. As we read a moment ago from James, back in James chapter 1, the trials, the pain, the difficulty, the issues that we face, if we face them with Christ-likeness, they reflect God's glory. And they can reflect to our growth as a Christian. Specifically, James, the brother of Jesus, tells us that when we're tested, it's an opportunity for hupomone to be instilled in our lives. Trials, difficulties, pain, suffering, it's an opportunity to be filled with hupomone. Now, all we've got to do is let hupomone do its work. And if we do so, we'll be made perfect. We'll be made complete. And we will lack nothing. Of this, you and I can be assured. God is at work in every situation, bringing glory to his name through you and me. Scripture tells us that for those who love God, all things work together for good. All things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. All things, not some things. All things, not just the pleasant things. All things work together. Now, to reflect the character of Jesus, you and I, we've got to have hupomone. Now, I'm certain if God wanted to, he could just give us all the hupomone we needed. But I'm urging each of us to use the trials that we encounter to develop hupomone. The tribulations that we have to deal with, the pain, the suffering, the hurts, can yield steadfastness, endurance, perseverance. And those are the characteristics, those are the traits, that idea of hupomone, that marks Christians as people who can transform the world in which we live. You see, when you're assaulted because of your faith, Jesus tells us there's actually a blessing associated with that. Jesus lifted up his eyes upon the disciples and said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you shall be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, when people exclude you, when people insult you, when people reject you on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven." And among the Beatitudes is this final blessing. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It requires hupomone to overcome being poor in spirit. It requires hupomone to overcome hunger. It takes hupomone to overcome weeping. When you are hated, when you're excluded, when you're spurned due to your faith, you need hupomone to overcome. When you are persecuted, when you're facing evil for the sake of righteousness, you and I, we need hupomone. People, I can't emphasize enough the trials that we deal with, and trials are going to come. They're not endemic to any one of us. They're universal to all of us. When those trials come, those trials are not superfluous. Those trials are not needless. God is at work. He's refining in you. He's refining in me. And eventually, he will bring forth pure gold if we exhibit hupomone. Right now, even right now, God is stamping his character on your life. God right now is stamping his character on your life if you let him. And being Christ-like requires hupomone. The mature Christian, this is a tough one. This is a real tough one. A mature Christian doesn't register surprise when trials come. A mature Christian doesn't say, "Why did this happen to me?" A mature Christian, and like I said, this is tough, accepts that God will be with them no matter what. The mature Christian accepts that God will be with them no matter what. There's no need to fear. There's no need to be afraid, for God is with us wherever we go. The mature saint, he or she is confident that Jesus will supply the hupomone that they need. We need to have that confidence too. Now, James is teaching us to be a realist when it comes to trials in life. If we boldly face those trials, we do so knowing that we're relying on God for strength, we're relying on God for endurance, we're relying on God for comfort, we're relying on God for hupomone. He permitted us to enter those trials. He will be with us during those trials. He will bring us out of those trials if we let him. We're called to face trials boldly. We shouldn't try to shirk our responsibilities. We don't want to shrink away from the difficulty. We don't want to circumvent the process. There's a saying that goes something along the lines of, smooth seas do not make good sailors. Sometimes we're going to have to face the storms of life. Now, if we understand and appreciate what James is teaching us, we must get rid of all contemporary notions of wisdom. And these contemporary notions of wisdom are often tied to instant gratification. You know, you and I, we're not called in life to achieve some measure of success. We're not called in life to have some kind of authority. We're called to seek God's glory when things are the darkest. We're called to seek God and discover him standing with us in the midst of our trials. We are called to exhibit hupomone. Now, I know there are some of us here this morning, and when we leave this building, difficult trials start again. And it might be due to some family pressure. It might be due to some kind of temptation for which there seems to be no end. Maybe it's due to a return to a painful existence that we're called to endure. It's even possible that we might be facing fears that might surprise some of our brothers and sisters right here, right now. And those fears are not imagined, they are real. But what I do know is that weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes in the morning. And with hupomone, we can say with confidence, and we can live with confidence, the Lord is my helper, so I will have no fear. What can mere men do to me? The difficulties in our lives, the obstacles we face, give God the opportunity to show his power and his grace. And with that, brothers and sisters, the lesson is yours. Our word of the day has been hupomone, steadfastness, unflinchingly bearing up to a heavy load, focus beyond the pain, and never succumb. Now, you may be dealing with pressures and trials and issues and loads and pain that need the congregation's prayers, and you may need help with your hupomone. Maybe it's time that you've come to the conclusion you need to admit your shortcomings, recognize Jesus as your Lord and Savior, and be baptized for the washing away of your sins. Regardless of whatever need you may have this morning, please know the invitation is yours, and feel free to come forward as we stand and sing.